Nissan just lost billions for the second year running. It is closing 7 factories, cutting 20,000 jobs, and it put its own headquarters up for sale. And when a reporter asked the new chief executive whether the whole company might be sold off one day, he refused to say no. But the money is not the real story. The real story is quieter and worse. Millions of people simply stopped trusting Nissan. And Nissan did that to itself. For most of your life, this was one of the safe choices. The Altima somebody drove to work for 15 years without a second thought. The Sentra that got a kid through college. The Frontier that refused to die. Nissan built its entire identity on one promise. Dependable, affordable, no drama. Today it faces a problem it has never faced before, and it is not that people hate the cars. It is that people no longer believe in them. How does a company that sold reliability as its whole reason for existing end up with mechanics warning customers away from its own vehicles? To understand that, you have to go back to a decision that looked brilliant at the time and quietly poisoned everything that came after. Rewind about 15 years. Nissan was near the top of the industry, Japan's #2 automaker, moving millions of cars a year, tied through its alliance with Renault to one of the biggest car groups on the planet. And it decided to modernize its whole lineup around one clever piece of engineering, the continuously variable transmission, the CVT. On paper, it was genius. No gears to shift, smoother power, better fuel economy. So Nissan put its Xtronic CVT into exactly the cars that sold the most. The Altima, the Sentra, the Rogue, the Versa, the cars ordinary families bought by the millions. And it told those families the transmission fluid was lifetime. Sealed. Never needs changing. One less thing to ever worry about. Remember that word? Lifetime. Because it is going to come back to bury them. For a while it worked. The cars were cheap, sales were strong, and Nissan was undercutting Honda and Toyota and winning buyers who just wanted something affordable and simple. On the surface, everything looked fine. Underneath it, the cars were beginning to cook themselves alive. They started breaking early, not at 300,000 miles, but at 80,000, sometimes far less. Owners of those CVT Nissans reported the same symptoms over and over. A shudder under acceleration, a hesitation when they pressed the gas, overheating. And then, again and again, total transmission failure long before the car should have been anywhere near the end of its life. That lifetime fluid turned out to be the problem. It degraded, the transmission overheated, and the whole unit destroyed itself from the inside. And here's what turned annoyance into genuine anger. When one of these transmissions failed, the repair could cost $3,500 to $5,000, sometimes more than $6,000, on a car that might not be worth much more than that. People who had already paid off their Altima were suddenly handed a repair bill the size of a used car payment for the one part Nissan swore they would never have to think about. The complaints became lawsuits. Class action after class action in the United States, all making the same accusation, that Nissan knew the transmissions were failing and sold them anyway. Nissan settled without admitting fault and quietly extended the powertrain warranty on affected cars to 7 years or 84,000 miles. But it never issued a full safety recall, and by the time the paperwork was signed, most of those cars were already too old to qualify. The damage was already done. Nissan's reputation for dependability, the single thing it had spent decades selling, was gone. And a reputation, once it breaks, does not heal on your schedule. If this breakdown is holding your attention, a quick subscribe genuinely helps. Now watch how everything else failed at the same time, because trouble never arrives alone. While the reliability story was bleeding out, the top of the company was tearing itself apart. In 2018, the man who built modern Nissan, Chairman Carlos Ghosn, was arrested in Japan. A year later, he fled the country, reportedly smuggled out inside a shipping box, and turned up in Lebanon. an international fugitive. What followed was years of chaos, revolving door leadership, and a company that could no longer decide what it wanted to be. Then the money started to vanish. Sales in China, one of the most important markets on Earth, cratered as cheaper, more advanced local brands took over. The lineup aged badly, some models going years without a serious redesign. Buyers drifted to rivals who refreshed their cars faster and packed them with newer technology. And Nissan, desperate for volume, reached for the one tool that quietly kills a brand, piling discounts on the hood, teaching its own customers to never pay full price again. Then came the numbers that showed the true size of the hole. For the financial year ending in March 2025, Nissan reported a net loss of roughly $4.5 billion, one of its worst results since Renault pulled it back from bankruptcy a quarter century ago. Moody's cut its credit rating to junk, and the response was brutal. Close 7 factories, shut 2 design studios, eliminate about 20,000 jobs, some 15% of the entire workforce. Put the Yokohama headquarters up for sale. The chief executive stood in front of reporters and admitted the company had, in his words, a mountain to climb. When a company is this deep in trouble, it goes looking for a rescue. Nissan thought it had found one. In late 2024, it entered merger talks with Honda, a deal worth around $60 billion that would have created the third largest automaker in the world. For a moment, it looked saved. Then it fell apart. Honda pushed to make Nissan a wholly owned subsidiary, a takeover rather than a partnership of equals, and Nissan's pride would not allow it. By early 2025, the talks were dead, and Nissan was alone again, except now the entire industry had watched it get left at the altar, and the losses kept coming. For the year ending March 2026, Nissan lost another 533 billion yen, battered by American tariffs on the cars it ships into the States and by the cost of closing all those plants. 2 straight years drowning in red ink, more than yen 1 trillion combined, close to $8 billion gone. Then came the detail that says everything. Asked directly whether Nissan might eventually be sold off entirely, the new CEO, Ivan Espinosa, would not rule it out. The head of a company that once put cars in driveways on every continent, openly leaving the door open to selling the whole thing off. Now, here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because there is good news, and the good news is the trap. Nissan's turnaround is, on paper, working. The second loss was actually smaller than the first. The company squeezed out a thin operating profit again, cash flow turned positive in the back half of the year, and management is now forecasting a small net profit ahead, declaring it has moved beyond recovery into growth. If you only read the balance sheet, you would think the worst was over. But the balance sheet was never where the real damage lived. You cannot cut your way back into trust. Closing a factory does not unstrand the driver whose lifetime transmission died at 80,000 miles. Laying off 20,000 people does not call back the millions of owners who got burned, or the mechanics now steering their customers toward Toyota. The recovery everyone is celebrating fixes the one number that was never actually the problem. And the competition Nissan needs to beat is not waiting for it to heal. Toyota and Honda still hold the reliability crown Nissan handed them. Cheaper, sharper brands out of China keep rewriting what buyers expect at every price. And Nissan sits in the middle of it, no longer the cheapest, no longer the most trusted, no longer certain what it is even for. That is the hardest problem a company can face. Not a bad quarter, not a broken factory, a broken promise. And you can close every plant on the map and still not repair that. Nissan survived Gosen. It survived near bankruptcy once already. The open question is whether any brand can survive the slow death of the single thing it was ever really selling, the quiet belief that it would not let you down. You have watched Nissan your whole life. Now you get to watch what happens when the trust finally runs out. Subscribe.